Postiz is an open source tool that allows you to manage your social media life. As you can see from their website, I'll share the URL in the show notes. With Postiz, you can automate the postings to social media, you can gather analytics from it, and it has tools that allow you to be more effective. Postiz can be either self-hosted, which is the topic of today's HowTo, or you can consume the service online by taking on a subscription. We're focusing on the self-hosting aspect. And to lay the groundwork, we're going to install Postiz on Ubuntu Server 20.04.1, and Ubuntu will be running on Proxmox virtual machine. Here we have the options you can operate Postiz from. The last option, online service, is a service where you're using the servers of someone else and is beyond the scope of our discussion. The other four options are all self-hosted. The first option, self-hosting single computer, means that you have a dedicated computer, you log into that, you call up Postiz from that computer, and you do all the magic direct. In this particular case, the best choice of Ubuntu would be desktop, because you have the GUI and you have productivity tools that you can use. The second option, self-host local LAN, means that computers on the local network will access the Postiz server, and the Postiz server itself will not be interacted with through the GUI. This is the option we'll be focusing on here, and even though you can install either the desktop or the server versions of Ubuntu, it makes more sense to install the server, since the server has a smaller footprint and you therefore get more bang for the buck. Self-hosted public is almost identical to the option above that. The main difference is that with the local LAN, the URL is not going to be registered with a domain. You can't use it from the internet. In our case, it's going to be postiz.homenet.lan. While with the public, you would have a registered domain, www.whatever, and you can access it to the internet. The final option, self-host enterprise, is for bigger setups which manage larger campaigns and have more people focused on this. And the main difference here between the enterprise and the other options is that the components making up Postiz, rather than being all grouped on one server, as is the case in our HowTo, can be distributed on different machines. And therefore you can manage larger throughputs and distribution. We won't go into them here. As I said earlier, we're going to use Proxmox as a virtual machine. I have various videos on Proxmox. The other points relate to Postiz. So if you're not going to install on top of Proxmox, either because you're going to install on bare metal or you're going to use a different hypervisor, just skip points 1 and 3. We are in the Proxmox dashboard and we're going to create a new VM. We're going to call the VM Postiz. No changes here. In the OS, we're going to specify the ISO we downloaded, which is the Ubuntu Server. The guest OS, everything to be left as default Linux and version 6. Next tab is the System tab, and here we don't need to make any changes to the specifications we have here. Under disk, we're going to specify the size of our disk, and I'm increasing that to 50 gig. 50 gig will, after you install everything, give you about 11 gig of free disk space. Adjust, add more if you think you'll need more. Under CPU, I'm choosing 2 sockets, 2 cores, with a total of 4 cores. Again, here there is no need to make any other changes. The final change we will make in our virtual machine is to increase the memory to 8 gig. Network, there is no need to make any changes. Here we have a review, and then we click finish. The VM, as you can see, is now being provisioned. And here we're going to start the process of installing Ubuntu. Proxmox boots on the ISO. We try or install Ubuntu Server. And here I'm going to speed up the video to shorten this part. Language, continue without updating. I'll update later. Keep the defaults for the keyboard. Type of installation, I'm sticking to the defaults. Network, it detects automatically. And I'm using the entire disk for Ubuntu. In my case, I don't need to encrypt the volume. Choose done. We confirm that we want to erase our virtual disk, and now we're giving our credentials. I'm using the account HME-admin. I'm naming the server VM Postiz. Done. I'm skipping Ubuntu Pro. We'll deal with it after this part. We're not going to install OpenSSH server at this time. The installation is complete, and we go into a reboot cycle. Here we're asked to remove our virtual CD. Simply press enter. Now we log into our Ubuntu server with the credentials we entered during installation. And the next thing we're going to do is check for updates, apply them, and install OpenSSH server. This part will be sped up. Rather than access and control my Postiz server from within the Proxmox console, I prefer to use an SSH tool such as Caddy. One of the reasons for this is that copying and pasting between my host machine and Postiz is difficult. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to install and configure Caddy. To do this, I need to know the IP address of Postiz. Type in IP address show, as indicated here, and take note of the IP address. We will also need the name of the network interface, and these are at the moment indicated on your screen. We open Caddy, and in the configuration, we enter the IP address of the Postiz server. Once we've done that, the first time we will be prompted to accept the host keys. This is for security purposes. Since we trust this machine, we'll accept it, and once we do that, the PuTTY interface comes up. And we can log into our Postiz server. We have a message that tells us that there is a reboot necessary, and therefore we're going to reboot before we continue to the next stage. During installation, we were asked whether we would like to subscribe to Ubuntu Pro. Ubuntu Pro, I'm not going to delve deep into it, I'll share a link to this page, gives you added benefits. And if you have less than 5 Ubuntu computers, you can benefit from them without any additional cost. To join the Ubuntu Pro program, you have to go from a web browser into Ubuntu and register for it. Once you've done that, you need to then install your key and never share that key into the server version or desktop version of Ubuntu. With the desktop version, you can use GUI all the way. With the server version, the attachment of your key to the server is through a terminal window. Now going to install the QEMU-Guest agent inside our Postiz server. This applies only to Proxmox, so if you're not installing on top of Proxmox, you can skip this section. QEMU is a free and open source emulator that emulates the processor of a computer. To install it, you need to run with elevated privileges apt install QEMU-Guest agent. Once the process completes, you can check whether QEMU is running, and if you try it, you will see that at the moment it is not active. That is because this process requires us to activate it from within Proxmox itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to shut down the server and then make the necessary changes in Proxmox. With the machine in a switched off state, select the VM Postiz in our case, click on Options, and from the Options menu, choose QEMU-Guest agent. Change the option from unchecked to checked, restart the server, and now if you go in and check the state of the QEMU service, you will see that it is activated. We are now going to start the actual foundational Postiz installation. Up till now, we're just readying the machine on which to install the product and its dependencies. Before I start, I want to point out that Postiz docs documentation is quite thorough. And if you follow along, you can get to the results I am sharing here. The first step requires us to install Docker Compose. From the Postiz docs, I click the link to get to Docker docs, and I'm going to follow the steps to install Docker on our VM Postiz. I will copy and paste from the site and make changes, and all the code will be made available for you to copy and paste. The first thing we're going to do is set up Docker's ATP repository. So I copied the code from the site and I'm going to paste it in my terminal. That stage complete, we are going to install the latest version of the Docker packages. Packages installed, let's check it out by running the hello world. It worked, but If you look closely, this was executed with elevated sudo privileges. We would like to be able to invoke Docker without having elevated privileges. But if you look at the command now, you will see that without sudo, the image was not executed. So what we need to do is to grant non-root users the right to call up Docker images. First, we try to create the Docker group, and it already exists. Next, we add the user to this group. Next, we activate changes. And finally, we verify whether a non-root user can call up the image. And as you can see, he could. The final part is to get Docker to start on boot. We don't want to have to go and manually switch it on, so what we're going to do is enable the services that are required and verify that they have in fact been activated. And that concludes the Docker component of Postiz. Postiz uses Docker Compose to build its architecture. What happens now is that we are going to use the sample Docker Compose YAML file we are seeing on the screen and make changes to it, and then using Docker we will execute it. And Docker will download automatically all the components, install them, and get them going. In our HowTo, the website is called postiz.homenet.lan, and we're going to make changes to the file to reflect this URL. We're therefore now going to copy this file, paste it into a text editor, and in the text editor we need to change 4 lines. 3 of them are identical and they are the URL for our Postiz server. In our case, the URL is going to be postiz.homenet.lan, so I'll use a text editor to replace all of them. And then there is the JWT secret in which you're going to put a random string. I've blurred that out to ensure that everyone does their own. In a terminal window on our Postiz server, we're going to create the directory where we're going to place the file. We're going to call that Postiz, created, change to it, and now using a text editor, Nano in my case, we're going to create the Docker Compose file. And the name I'm going to use is the one which is in the Postiz documentation. So we're going to call that docker-compose.yml. And here we're going to paste the script we edited. To execute that script, we use docker compose up, and as you can see, Docker pulls down the containers and sets up our Postiz environment. From the documentation, I am highlighting what you need to do if either the Docker Compose file is changed or you make changes to the script. You need to first enter Docker Compose down and follow that by Docker Compose up to recreate the environment and any changes you have done. We're back to the installation script. Once it completes, and you'll get the message being highlighted on the screen, you can terminate the window and Postiz is now installed. The next stage deals with Caddy, and before we proceed, I want to share this drawing to explain how everything falls into place. Your browser will communicate via HTTPS with Caddy, which acts as a reverse proxy, a go-between your browser and the Postiz containers. The Postiz containers are managed and handled by Docker. Now let's proceed to the installation and configuration of Caddy, which, as with the other parts, will come mostly from documentation. We get to Ubuntu and we're going to install the stable release from the code being shown here. Copy that, move to a terminal window on our Postiz server and paste the code and execute it. Now we are editing with elevated privileges the file /etc/caddy/caddy file. It comes pre-configured and we're going to gut everything out and replace it with our reverse proxy. And if you look closely, we have the name of our URL, postiz.homenet.lan. We're specifying that it is a reverse proxy and that anything it receives, it will transmit forward to localhost 5000, and the security TLS is internal. Once we've done that, we save the file. Having created the Caddy file, we're now going to create the service that will invoke it. This way, whenever the Proxmox server starts, the Caddy service is running and can receive requests on postiz.homenet.lan. All the information I'm sharing here is available on the Caddy site. Using elevated privileges, we're going to create a file called caddy.service. Into this file, we're going to paste the script we got from Caddy's GitHub page and save it. The service references the Caddy file we just created before. The last action is to verify that the Caddy service is running, and we do that with the systemctl status and the name of the service. And as we can see, it is active. The last stage of this how-to deals with how we're going to translate the URL we gave to this machine into the machine's IP address. And here we have to look at 3 of the self-hosting options we discussed in the beginning. Let's start with self-host public. In this case, the URL is managed by a third-party company from whom you purchased that URL. They're going to help you to translate your www.whatever.whatever into an IP address where you will eventually arrive into the Postiz server. I'm not going to delve into that. It should be fairly easy to achieve. The scenario we're going to look into now is that of self-host single computer. To do this, you need to go onto your Postiz server and with elevated privileges, you need to edit the file etc hosts. In this file, you need to add an entry, and I'm going to use 127.0.2.1 and make that equivalent to our URL, which is postiz.homenet.lan. Save the file, and in my case, since I'm using a server and don't have a browser, I can't demonstrate it. As a proof of concept, if I ping postiz.homenet.lan, you will see that I'm getting a response from that IP. The final option we're going to look at is self-host local LAN. In this scenario, every computer on the LAN has the potential
to access the Postiz server. To achieve this, each computer needs therefore to be able to translate postiz.homenet.lan into Postiz Server IP address. And we're going to look at two ways to achieve this. Earlier on, you remember we took note of the IP address and the network interface name. We used IP-ADDR show. Now we're going to use these details. If you have a server, that server should ideally have a fixed, non-changing IP address. Normally, when you set up a computer in your local network, that IP remains constant, provided the machine is on. If the server is off, when the computer comes back online and requests an IP address, the router may not give it the same IP. In the context of the LAN discussion, imagine the implication in which you have programmed your other computers to translate postiz.homenet.lan into an IP address, and the IP address has changed. So the first thing we're going to do is to make the IP address of our Postiz server fixed so that it never changes. Effectively, we're going to hardcode the IP address. Depending on what equipment you have at home and your familiarity with the topic, things can be different, but I'm going to go broadly over the topic. The first thing you need to do is to check in /etc/netplan the YAML file that describes your network interface. Edit it with elevated privileges and replace the entire contents of the file with the sample script here. You need to make certain changes. These are for the setup I have described here. Amongst them, you need to change the interface name. You need to set the IP address so that it is within the context of your network. My network is 192.168.16. If your network is different, you have to adjust these. You have to adjust the DNS settings as well. The first method involves changing all the computers from which you want to access the Postiz server. For a Windows machine similar to what we did on Ubuntu, we need to open a text editor with administrative rights and open the file in the Windows directory system32 drivers etc host. We enter the IP address of the Postiz server and the name we're going to refer to. If you have a router that accepts DNS static entries, you can enter the entry directly into it without having to go to every computer. In my case, this is a macrotic router and I'm sharing the screen. After you have set the entry, you can go and using the ping either from the command line or in my case I'm using the ping in Winbox, you can check that the routing is working. The solution, we're now opening our browser. We're going to type https postiz.homenet.lan, and the first time we call up the page we're getting the warning that the certificate for this site is not issued by a certificate authority. Do we trust it? We do. We click Advanced, Accept Risk, and Continue. Once we do that, we are presented with the Postiz interface, and then we can take it on from there. The scope of this how-to was to get us to this state. In the show notes, I will include links to communities where you can interchange and interact with other users of Postiz.